Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 17. On tonight's show, I'm going to be talking about a photo shoot I did in the village of Moniaive in the hills of Dumfries and Galloway, which was based, it was at the Moniaive Comic Festival. Comics as in the things you read rather than as in the stand-up comedians. It was quite a big shoot. It was a big team of people involved in it. So there's quite a lot to chat about with that. And then in the second half, I'll be moving on to the critique section, where we have a couple of people who sent in images looking for advice and ideas and feedback on how to improve images. This is now going out on Facebook Live. So if you're watching with me, then please leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Say hi. If this is your first time here as well, by all means, let me know where you're from. It's always interesting to know whereabouts people are based. So that, and of course, if you find any of this interesting at all, useful, do consider the idea of a wee donation at buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. You can see the link just over on the left there, on the right as you see it. And it's kind of like the equivalent of a tip jar, but it helps support these podcasts. It's not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. So tonight then, Moniaive. There's these. It has been called the coolest village in Scotland in some corners. It is a small village in about 10-15 miles north of Dumfries in southwest Scotland. You travel out, head off little back squiggly roads. If you're used to the city, then it's going to really feel like the middle of nowhere. But a lot happens in this small village. And the comic festival started up about 20 years or so ago in its first incarnation. Essentially, for those who can remember back that far, in the UK particularly, there was a foot and mouth problem, which with a lot of cattle, which spread, and it resulted in, across the UK, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cattle being slaughtered. It was a devastating time, and in a rural community like you have in southwest Scotland, it had quite an impact. Now, in the wee village of Moniaive lives Alan Grant and his wife Sue. Now, Alan Grant is something of a legend amongst comic book writers. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, particularly, he was doing a lot of work, one of the main writers for Batman. Prior to this, for those of you who ever knew about 2000 AD, which came out in the late 70s, still going, came out around the time of punk, really, very kind of indie comic, but it was very subversive, and out of this came Judge Dredd. And again, if you're into your comic book characters or anything like this, then you'll know about Judge Dredd. And along with John Wagner, Alan Grant was, the two of them wrote all the Judge Dredd comics, series that were in them. And so what they decided to do as the foot and mouth was, they thought, well, okay, let's try and bring in something, bring in some tourism to the village. Let's sort of kind of get things going. And because of Alan's contacts in the comic book world, they put out words, and some top artists and writers came from all over the place to be at Moniaive Comic Festival. Now, a lot of these artists and writers, big names again, now you would expect to see them in things like San Francisco Comic Con or even Glasgow Comic Con, but a lot of these people they couldn't be bothered going. They might not go over to something even if they were getting all expenses paid. But, well, Fallon and Sue, yeah, of course, they'll come to the village. And what was absolutely amazing about the comic festival was, in this tiny little village, you could go along, and because the sort of the venues were the village hall, local pub, scout hall kind of thing, you really were up close and you had immediate contact, and it was truly a wonderful experience. Now, they ran this for 5 or 6 years. I think every year they said, right, this will be the last one. Anyway, after a while, eventually it was. And so, whilst I went along to a few of them back then, and then it all sort of disappeared, and it just sort of moved into history. Now, if we go back 4 or 5 years, for those who were watching about 4 weeks ago, I think it was 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was talking about a shoot I did for a fashion shoot for textile designer Moniaive McPherson, where we did a nighttime shoot against an old barn that had a mural painted across it. And the link with that now is that was the first shoot where I did I was collaborating, was working with Ralph Yates-Lee of B20 Hairdressing Salon in Dumfries. He came on board, brought along makeup artists, hairdressers, we had models, and up until that point was the biggest shoot I'd done in terms of numbers of people and trying to sort of organise all this. It sort of cemented the relationship I had with Ralph, and we've gone on to do many shoots together since, where I've done the shoot and then he's come along with bringing a small team of hairdressers, makeup artists, models, whatever. Now at this point, after the success of the fashion shoot, I was chatting away with Ralph and said, well, okay, what about you? Got any idea, anything you've ever really fancied doing, And he said he had a real love for manga, Japanese manga. Now, for those who aren't fully versed in the kind of comic book world, manga it's a form of manga anime. It's a form of cartoon, really, drawings, animation, illustration. So it's come out of Japan. It's got quite a distinctive style to it. It used to be very niche. It's now influenced massively, much more into mainstream. Once you kind of see it, you'll recognise it. So Ralph had this idea that whilst he was in the salon, he was kind of doing mostly more kind of regular hairstyles and what have you. Always fancied doing something where things were kind of a bit more cartoonish and over the top. So we thought, well, okay, this sounds like it could be fun. And beautifully nice bit of timing, Moniaive Comic Festival was being revived. For 2016, 17 and 18, I think it was. So it would be 4 years ago. They managed to get a 3-year a grant to cover running it for 3 years. And so we decided, well, okay, could we do something like this? Ralph was living in Moniaive at the time. So essentially what happened was we decided to set up where there's an old part of the Craig Darragh Hotel. The Craig Darragh Hotel is a sort of central inn hotel pub in Moniaive. Tim, an amazing guy, has so many things going on there. It really is kind of the heart and soul of the village. One of the outbuildings, the old coach house, had been converted for doing small gigs for bands playing, and it wasn't being used for the comic festival. So essentially we occupied it, and or Tim let us occupy it, and for the duration we decided what we would do is I would do a photo shoot. Ralph, again, got hairdressers, makeup artists, models, and we took over that space. And then I did a photo shoot, so I could do a photo shoot. But the thing was, because it was happening in the middle of the comic festival, meant that it was open to the public. So anybody could just come in, wander off the street, and see what was going on. And that was a new experience for me, was this idea essentially of like a public photo shoot. I mean, it has to be said that by and large, mostly I wasn't overly aware of the number of people that were in fact coming in, because I was too busy concentrating on doing the photography. But even though it wasn't in the official program, because we'd been too late for that and it's sort of just very much a last minute thing, anybody wandering past who sort of stuck their head round the door, wondered what was going on, it actually did get quite a good turnout of people. What also happened was some of the artists, the comic book artists, came along and started sketching the models as well. And then some other people could come along and they could sort of grab pens and paper and have a go at it. So while I'm busy photographing them, you've essentially got these amazing models at the same time. And then another aspect of this was there was a guy who had a 3D printer. Mac Lab was set up in Dumfries at the time. It's since closed. But they had a 3D printer, and what this... I've suddenly forgotten his name. Is it Stephen Sparrow? Sorry if it's the wrong one, if you're not Stephen. Pretty certain the Sparrow's right. But anyway, so he had this sort of mobile scanner, and if the model stood really still, he could walk around, do a 360 degree move around the model, and then essentially capture that as a file, feed it into a 3D printer, which could then print up a little model of the model. I think probably what I'll do just here is I've got a wee behind the scenes video. It's about 2.5 minutes long, but it does give you a really good sense of what was going on at the time. So let me just flick over to here, pull this up, press that, and here we go. So this is in Moniaive. You can see that, and this is hairdressers at work. There was a whole team. We had 4 models, makeup artists, 3 hairdressers, I think, and Ollie, who was helping out, sort of charging around, making sure everybody, a bit of a runner, I suppose, really. Here you can see me setting up. This is a space we were using. I've tethered the camera to the laptop so that I can see what's going on. The backdrop were these sheets of wallpaper which a couple of the artists had scribbled manga style comic drawings on the back of, and we decided to use them as a backdrop. I did 2 styles of photo with each model, and I'll talk about the different treatments in the editing process after this. My friend Alan Wright came along, did some background video for me, and Katerina, one of the models, she also set up her camera, said it allowed us to do some time-lapse bits as well. So you can see here that, you know, I mean, especially this one here, the hair is incredibly elaborate. This was where I really, you know, it was brought home to me just how you're just about to take the shot and the hairdresser will run in and make changes all over again. But it was quite exciting. And here you can see we've got comic book artists sitting there with their pens and pads scribbling away. Everyone's got a different style of drawing, being inspired. So 3 different styles of drawing from the same, each from the same model, each doing their different interpretations. Here's the 3D printer that I was talking about. So you can see him going around. And this is what the files look like. Then onto the 3D printer, and they start printing them up. And there you can see these models were only about, you know, so big. And then this was a final group shot of the 4 together. And then this is the team. You know, we had the models, we had the hairdressing crew, we had the artists, video photography, and all the special thanks. And the music, I think you could maybe hear a bit going on in the background, was by Clio. So that gives you a sort of sense of what was going on. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of energy, but a lot of fun. We finished up sometime around about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then all went for a meal afterwards. So we then ended up with let's see, with some of the pictures. And what I'll do, I'll just show you some of the pictures here. So now I did 2 different treatments. I'll show you the first ones that I did. So this one is, sorry, flip over. So this one's Katerina, and so you saw before that there was the backdrop of the sheets of wallpaper that had got manga style cartoons drawn on them, and then what I've got is I've got 2 flashes. On the left we've got red gel, on the right, excuse me, there's a blue gel. 3 flashes actually, because then there's the main key light coming through a softbox as well, which you can actually see reflected in Katerina's glasses here. I've got a narrow softbox with a grid across it. So that's the light that's falling on her, lighting her mostly up, and then you can see the red over on the left and the sort of blue hitting the right. And you can notice how the colours hitting the background as well. So the idea was, the hairstyles are being done to be really kind of a bit funky and out there. Makeup is being done to sort of, again, be very unorthodox. We're going cartoon character with the clothing and what have you. So could you create cartoons out of that? Hold on a sec. Flipping through the wrong places there. Let's show you another one. This was Haley. Okay. Typical. We now got playing up with the... let's open that with photos. Will that work better? Yes, there we go. So Haley, this was the one with the amazing sort of hair with the loops in it. So again, you can see the blue and the red hitting in. We've got Jacob. Now with this one, instead of a blue, I did a green. And then with Haley, this is Amy, and with Amy we've got gone back to the blue and the red, but swapped around from the other sides. So lots of colour, and that's what I really wanted to do with these. So my first treatment, so the 4 headshots were all about going for really bright colour. But then what I wanted to do, I wanted to try a second style of doing things where I pulled back and I did body shots. And so if I show you, so if you can see this one, so here we've got Katerina. And what I've done here is I've gone for a kind of blue sepia gradient map. And I've included the flashes within it. So it then becomes very much, here's a shoot. You can see that it's a shoot going on. But because of the colouring, it's almost like a kind of... there are graphic novels which have this kind of... where you're not going full colour, you're going to this sort of monotone or duotone colour style. So I felt it kind of gave it more of a graphic novel feel to it. We also have this one of Jacob. Jacob was great, just give me this sort of dead, sort of serious glower into the camera. Here's one of Haley, which I think you would have seen in the video where she's kicking her leg up and sort of trying to just capture that moment. And this one of Amy. And then here was the group of all 4 of them together. So, and actually this then was the full team. I did a group shot and then just did the same kind of treatment with it. So as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There's 14 people involved there if you include the the artists as well who were doing the drawings. So big team, a lot of fun. It just really, and it really kind of it added to the whole spirit of the comic festival. Now, in successive years, in 2017 and 2018, Ralph, me, and teams of other people went back and did this again, with different themes as well. So in future weeks, I'm going to revisit and talk about those ones. What I will do, though, I think, before I move on to anything else, I'll just show you briefly, for those who are interested in kind of how you get this effect. And I think what if I probably... Okay, let's just open with this one with Photoshop, just to give you a sense of what's happening. Now, normally, so we've got a bright, colourful thing here. Now, if you're converting to black and white, the number of different ways of doing it, but if I use the gradient map, just to show you how that, so we've got a black and white here. Now, the gradient map, what it's doing is moving between, if you look over on the left of the screen, you've got the forward colour is black, the back one is white, and you can see this gradient over on the right hand side here. So what it does is it takes the darkest part of the image as black, the lightest part of the image as white, and then every gradient in between is the shade it matches with that shade of grey. So that's giving you a gradient. But you don't have to do black and white. You can choose any colours you like. If I decide to make that red, and in fact, let's change that again. So I need to pick it off from there. So let's say I make that red, and I make the background sort of yellow, and then if I apply gradient map, you can see it moves. The darkest parts are red, the lightest parts are yellow. So you can play around with this in any number of ways. Now, when I put it into, what I did with this is, in Photoshop, there's a whole bunch. If you click on it, there's a downward option. You don't have to just go for the black and white. There's a menu option, and you've got lots of other things to play with. So you've got all sorts of different greys. Oh, sort of mixed. Yeah, where was I? Let's go back to the gradient map. It's got inverses. You can play with pinks. You can play with blues. All sorts of different presets. You can make up your own as well. But they've also got presets whether you want to go really psychedelic. But down here, what I went for is they've got a couple of blue and sepia, and I think that was one. That's two. What was that? Yeah, that one. That's right. And that's really the effect I'm giving. And what this is doing is it's meaning you've got a very dark blue as the darkest part, and you've got a very pale, well, virtually white at the lightest part. But in the middle, you've got a paler blue and a sepia. So the more I lighten it, the more sepia it will become. So if I just take these levels, if I move that and brighten it up, you can see it becomes much more sepia. If I darken it down, it becomes much more blue. So that's what's kind of giving you that effect. Not perhaps for everybody's taste, but for me, I thought it was really quite cool, and I really enjoyed doing that. It was a kind of new way of playing around with gradient maps, which I hadn't done before either. And I like the whole point of this photo shoot was to tie in with the fact that it was a comic festival and to make photos that look like comics, really. Yeah, it was a fun shoot, a lot to do, and I learned a huge amount in the process. And it was really interesting as well, this open to the public, whereby people could come in and then draw and watch what was going on. So that gives me, that sort of gives you a general sense of what was going on with that. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to flip through to Brian, hi Kim, hi Brian, glad you could make it. Pat, hi too, hi Pat, so glad you could make it along. And Fiji, looks like a very busy scene and excellent photographs. Well, thanks Fiji. Yes, it was extraordinarily busy. Right, okay. So what I'm going to do now then is move on to the critique section. Let's close all those windows first. Just a little reminder that if you find this interesting or you'd like to support these podcasts a little bit more, there's buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Right. Okay, so the critique section. This is a place where if you're interested in joining in, then there's a Facebook group also called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. So all you need to do is join that. I mean, if you need to find it, just take that phrase, type it into the search bar, and the group will come up. Join the group, and then you can submit images. If you've got a photo that you feel, so maybe it's something you always quite liked, but nobody else seemed to, and you weren't really sure where the feedback was, it was difficult to get proper feedback on it, or you feel that, something was nearly there, but not quite, and you didn't really understand why, or you've got a particular question, anything photography related, then put it into the Facebook group, and I'll pick it up, and then this goes out every Tuesday at 7:30. I usually check things throughout the week, and then particularly on Tuesday morning I start gathering up what I'm going to be putting into the evening show. If you're watching this on YouTube, because I record all these, and then usually on a Wednesday afternoon, sometime between Wednesday afternoon and Wednesday evening, this goes up onto YouTube. If you want to join in the conversation, please leave comments below. I do check in. I get notified sometimes by YouTube that I've got a comment, so we can carry on discussions on YouTube as well. If you are on YouTube, of course, please subscribe and click the little bell to get the notifications so that you know when new ones are being uploaded. On YouTube now, we've got this is number 17, so by the time you watch this on YouTube, there will be 17 episodes that you can go back and dip in and out of if you wish. Okay, so let's move on then. So what I'm going to do, I will start with, we've got a new member, Stacey Beth, and she sent me through a couple of photos. What are we going to start with? I think we'll start with this one here. So, Germantown Hall. So, Stacey says, I took this on a cloudy, flat day. The sky was flat, so I decided to go with black and white. Unfortunately, this was the best place to shoot, but all the items are in front of the building. It's a place in Mount Airy / Chestnut Hill, which is a historical area around Philadelphia. The building is abandoned, but in its day it was magnificent. So what we can immediately see, I can understand why it grabs your attention. There's a beautiful architectural structure to it, fantastic lines. The fact that it's now shut down means you're also tapping into that decaying older aspect. I mean, if I zoom in here, okay, we can see that it's been fenced off in places. We've also got growth coming through. We've got bits of the sandstone starting to dissolve and chip away. It certainly does look like it would have been quite a magnificent building in its day. Wreaths up into the stonework up here, balustrade, beautiful round structure, and clock tower at the top there as well. So absolutely, I can understand. You see a thing like this, and you go, wait, want to take a photo of this. Now, the sky was flat, so again, typical problem you might come across. This could look quite amazing if you had the sun hitting it when the sun was low in the sky. I don't know which way was north or south with this, so if it was hitting it from one side, you may well find that, you know, you could get some beautiful shade and shadows and lighting. But you're there, it's a dull day, so you take a photo, the colours aren't particularly vivid, so you've converted it to black and white. Yeah, that's a good choice, fairly standard thing to do. However, there are a couple of difficulties that we run into. Well, let's first, I'll tell you what, let's open this with Photoshop, just so I don't need to save Jacob. Okay. The first thing that's, well, there's two things that strike me. One is the problem of the fact that there are all these things in front of the building. You know, I mean, it's not just a case of the fences, but we've also got traffic lights and sign, and we've got this pole, and we've got these wires and what have you. The second problem we've got is the top of the tower is cut off, and the whole thing seems to be leaning over slightly to one side. So it's how you decide to straighten it. Now, part of the thing here is I'm imagining, by the sort of slight distortions within it, that the lens on your camera, you've probably got it as wide angle as you can go, and that's about as good as you can fit it in. But the problem is you have chopped the top off. And there's a feeling that had you been able to get further back, and I don't know what your restrictions were, whether they're standing in the middle of the road or you're standing the other side, or what else might be in the way, I think for a start you would have been able to get the top in. But there's also this problem of the fact that it feels tilted. Now, if we look here, this pole is completely vertical. And it looks like you've essentially used that to anchor everything. But the problem is, because of the wide angle nature of the lens you're using and everything else, and the fact that you're leaning back a bit to try and get it all in, means that the rest of it is all leaning over. So in a situation like this, you're better off trying to line it up so that the vertical is running in the middle of the picture rather than to one side. Now, I'm going to rotate this a little bit. I'll tell you what, let's swap this back to black and white, because that's going to do my head in otherwise when we start doing anything else. So if I just tilt that something like that, and yep, just thinking about, all right, I've got content aware on, so it's just going to fill in the bits and pieces. Immediately, I think you get a sense of, okay, it doesn't feel like it's falling over again. Now, it does mean that this pole over on the right is now leaning in a bit, but then this column is now leaning the other way. And because they're both kind of leaning in at equal angles, your brain goes, oh, that's okay, distorted perspective, and your brain kind of corrects it. So you can get away with that. The main thing was, in this version, is this top bit of tower here really does feel like it's leaning over. We just do that, that immediately creates a slightly more stable kind of feeling. But I think the other thing is, as well as, it looks like there's a bit of a building going off to the left here. I don't know what was there. I don't know whether you deliberately cropped it out or whether there was something more interesting in here. But with the top of the building missing, it really does kind of feel like it's been cut short. Overall, I think with something like this, by and large, you're either better off being closer into it and concentrating on details. Like, you know, if you come up, it looks like there's some really interesting archway and carvings. Yeah, beautiful bits of carving over here. So you could kind of go detail, or you actually need to be standing quite a bit further back, and then you give the building context, you give the building space. It's not just, and even though there would be things in between, maybe some more wires or a couple more poles, you can kind of get away with that a bit because people understand that you're standing back, or the brain understands that you're standing back, and that the building is behind a few layers of other things. So with this, I think it's a case of needing it to breathe. You need to give it a context, a space. It's not just about the building, it's about the building in its space. And I think if you sort of did something like that, then I think that you'd be onto a bit more of a winner with that. So primarily either pull back, give it some space, or move in and concentrate on details, or create a collection of photos at different distances and have an album where they all kind of work together. But as a standalone photo, you really either need more space to say this is the building, or you are designing to concentrate upon some of the details. And at the same time, making sure that you have a strong vertical holding it in place that's more central to where the picture is, rather than anchoring it on one side. So I hope that helps. The second picture Stacey sent me was this one called Wild Daisy. And she says, I took this for a competition and it did not go so well. It had some verticals, the background is bokeh. Should I attempt to darken the background further? I did get some light from the sun in the shot and thought it was interesting, but may have taken away from the shot. Please feel free to comment. I love taking macro shots, but it's not the majority of my photography. Okay, well, first off, yep, bright yellow flower, darker green background. You know, there's a nice sort of the color balance. You know, it's not a bad color scheme. However, there's a couple of other things which are playing against this. Yes, you've got a nice vertical running in the back. We've got a nice diagonal coming in from the side, which gives it, and these petals come out in a diagonal way. That's quite good. On an immediate, the main part of the photo that your eye gets drawn to, because all these petals are drawing light leading lines coming into it, is that central part. Now that central part is then smack bang in the middle of the photo. Now, if you've come across the idea of rule of thirds or dynamic tension, then, and I've talked about this in earlier episodes, I think possibly episode 1 or 2 or 3. If you go back to I've got an episode, I think it was maybe episode 2. I talk about rule of thirds and why images tend to work better if the main focal point is off center rather than in the dead center. So you can play around with the crop. Another slight problem with the crop here is you've taken the tip of this petal off here. There's nothing to stop you going in close on a picture, but if you've only got one petal where the tip has gone, then it feels like you didn't quite get the crop right. If several of them are gone because you zoomed in, you can kind of get away with that. But when there's just one, it feels more like an accident or hasn't quite got there. However, you've got two other problems that I think really play against this. The first one, the biggest one of the lot, is quite simply it's not in focus. It's blurred. And given the fact that you've got all these lines drawing into the middle, drawing your attention to this part, and this isn't just a case of it's a low resolution image. You did email me the high res version, but this is out of focus, and because it's out of focus, the brain kind of keeps wanting to make it sharper. Now, what's accentuating the fact that it's out of focus as well, but is also distracting, is what you've got in here is you put in an artificial lens flare. This spot here, which then follows, we can see spots here, a spot here, spots here, spot here, spot here, and the edge of a spot here. Now, for those who don't know, if the sunlight or your main light source is hitting your lens at a certain angle, it can kind of create this sort of sudden little flare of light, these little light patches. Now, quite often photographers are trying to desperately avoid lens flare, but sometimes you can use them for effect. Now, the thing is with this is it's not a natural lens flare. It's three reasons I know this. First of all, you can see that some of these bits of lens flare, like if I zoom in here, the line is very sharp. whereas the rest of the photo is completely blurred. You can see it particularly here. There's a very sharp line here, and it just wouldn't. That's not going to work because your camera's out of focus. All these things wouldn't be that sharp. The second thing is, this is in completely the wrong place. You wouldn't have a hotspot here unless that's where your light source is coming from. And the third thing is, I recognise it because it's a Photoshop effect. In fact, if I go to filter, is it stylize? Other, I can't remember exactly. Distort, noise. Ah, there we go. Under render, there is an effect called lens flare. And with lens flare, what I can do is I can, you see, I can move, I can put this here and I can move it about. And if I click OK, we now have an identical one that's been added, only it's now coming in the opposite direction. So I recognise it as something that's just been added on. And the fact is, Stacey, it's not adding anything to it. It just feels like it's kind of been randomly put on. If you're going to use lens flare, then you have to make sure that the lens is coming from the right angle of where it would be if you'd naturally taken the photo and there was light coming through the trees, or the foliage, or the wherever you're doing it. So in essence, that's I can understand the idea. Nice bright yellow flower, green background. It's a good starting point. But first of all, you need to get it in focus. You also, there's options of where you're cropping and how you're arranging it, the composition of it. And then the lens flare is completely superfluous. It's not adding anything. All it's doing is detracting. We've instead of looking at the photo, we immediately get drawn to this bright patch in the bottom left-hand corner of the photo. So lots to play with, and to. So, but anyway, I hope that gives you. Some food for thought, ideas. Feel free to come back to me if you want. I don't know if you've got a sharper version of that picture. Play with that. If you've got, almost always whenever we take a photo, we take half a dozen photos of anything at least. So look at the other versions that you've got. Find one that's in focus, and play around with the cropping. And again, I'm pretty certain it is episode 1 of this. I talk a lot about cropping. But I think between episode 1 and episode 2, if you look at where I've talked about cropping and I've talked about rule of thirds, I think you'll find a lot of really useful information in there which could help this kind of photography. Okay, thanks very much for sending those in. Right, next thing I want to look at is we'll go to VG, and I think what I will do is, there's 2 different photos I'm going to look at for VG. We've got this one, really powerful sunset image, and then we've also got another sunset image, which is this one, probably taken slightly just around a similar time, maybe slightly earlier than, but not much earlier than this one, except for the fact that it was at a different camera setting. In fact, I wonder if I just change that, do I get details pane? Do I get a sense of what your settings were with that? Okay, so this photo was taken f20 at 200th of a second, and this one was taken f10 800th of a second. Okay, which is making it much faster shutter speed, much less light coming in. So let's go to your comments. Okay, the first one you're talking about is this one. You say, when I tried to capture the whole sun, the water got darker. The reflections of sun on the water is missing, while in reality the water was literally glowing like a golden sheet. What could be the reason? It was too bright when I focused on the sun, and I was blinded to notice the rest of the background. And with the other one, it's also, in fact, it's just a kind of follow on. While taking sunset photographs, should we use a filter? Um, okay, what we're up against here with both these photos is trying to find the right balance of light. Let's just, if I take this one out for a moment just so we can stick them side by side. So we've got two sunset photos, both with different camera settings. In one of them, the sea in the foreground, the sea is kind of exposed okay, but the sky is just burnt out. In the other one, the sky is quite beautifully detailed. The sun, you can see the edge of it, whereas with the other one you can't see the sun at all. But the foreground, the sea has become really dark, and we're missing part of the beautiful reflections. And what we have here is a classic problem of trying to photograph something that's too bright for the camera to hold onto. Now, the very first thing I ought to say at this point is be very, very careful about pointing your camera at the sun. You've got a lens on the camera which is basically a magnifying glass, and you're putting it through the camera, and then if you're looking through the viewfinder, you could be magnifying the sun going straight into your eyes and essentially burning out, bits of the back of your eye. You can be, if you're not careful, you can blind yourself. Just when you're a kid, your parents always say, don't stare directly into the sun. And if you've got binoculars, for God's sake, don't stare directly into the sun. And the camera is just it's sort of monocular rather than a binocular. So you have to be extraordinarily careful if you're doing something like that. If you are photographing the sun, then ideally you use the screen on the back. Don't look through the viewfinder. Use the little display screen on the back. Now, if you're doing old style analog photography, you can't do that, but these are done with digital. So do not ever look straight through at the sun. It's a really dangerous kind of thing to do. Okay, warnings aside, hope you've been suitably admonished. Assuming you did that, we run into the same problem now. Last week, VG, you sent me a couple of photos of where you were trying to photograph a candle, and this is basically the same problem with the candle you had at the time. If you adjusted the settings to it be exposed for sort of hottest part of the flame, everything else became super dark. If you adjusted for the surroundings, then the flame whited out. And this is exactly what's happening here. The sun is basically so bright, it massively outstrips everything else. So I thought I just grabbed, these are not edited photos, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of photos I did a few years ago. I was looking for something else, happened to find these photos, which kind of illustrate the same problem. So 3 photos taken from the same place. Here we've got a sunset over Kukubri Bay, and I've taken the photo here, and the sea is okay. The rocks in the foreground are still silhouetted but the sky, the sun, completely burnt out. You can't see. You can see a bit of where the reflection on the water, but you can't see where, it's just massively done out. So I quickly made massive changes. I've got this on a f7.1. I had it 125th of a second. So I whacked it up to 2000th of a second, and immediately got that. So these photos are taken seconds apart. In fact, if I just check that, I don't even have a second timer. They are taken just maybe 10 seconds, however long it took me to change the settings. So it's exactly the same scene, but I've changed the settings on the camera. Now I've changed the settings on the camera. We can see the sun nice and clearly. We've got the edge, we've got a nice glow, but everything else is virtually blacked out. You can't really see anything. So then I played around and made a quick change again, and I did this one, which is then the compromise photo, which is at 1,000th of a second. So we're at this problem of the fact that your choice appears to be you expose for the sun and everything else goes black, or you expose for the surrounds and the sun just whites out. And that's a tricky thing to try and get. Now, one of the keys, one of the ways the big fancy landscape photographers do it, or even the small fancy landscape photographers do it, is which you mentioned here, should we use a filter? So let me talk just a little bit about filters. Filters are a piece of glass that you place in front of the lens of your camera. You can replace, you can sometimes, some of them thread on, sometimes you have a little frame and then you slot a filter into it. So the piece of glass, now there's a whole array of different filters which do different things. Now, one of the things a typical filter, you get something like an ND filter, neutral density filter, which stops it from color shifting. So one of the things you can do is, it's a bit like putting sunglasses on, really. You stick a kind of like a dark glass slide in front of the lens. And what that allows you to do is photograph really bright objects without going to the extreme settings on your camera. Another thing you can do is, it means that if you want to do a long exposure, say because you're looking to get smooth, silky movement in water, or you're wanting to create a kind of intentional blur, but you're doing it in daylight. In daylight, because it's so bright, you can't get the camera at a low enough shutter speed, because if you turn the shutter speed right down, too much light is getting in. So you essentially do the equivalent of sticking strong sunglasses over the front of your lens, and that slows everything down. So that's what a normal neutral density filter does. And these come in different strengths as to how much they do. Now, one of the things a lot of landscape photographers do is they use a graded filter. So go and Google up a graded neutral density filter. And what that does is it creates a gradient map. So it's darker at the top, and as you go down, it gets the strength of the filter dissipates. Some of these, you've maybe got quite a strong patch at the top and then just a little bit of gradient, and then it's pale. Some of them it just sort of gradates all the way down. There are some sunglasses you can get where it's thicker at the, it's stronger at the top and it's very little shading at the bottom. Those tend to find absolutely ideal for driving in strong sunlight, because the upper part, so you can cut out the sunlight or the glare coming off the road or the surrounds while you're driving, but at the same time you can glance down and you can see the instrument panel, how fast you're going, what your revs are, whether there's a warning light coming up. Whereas the problem is, if you're using kind of thick sunglasses which are the same density all the way through, it might allow you to see the road more clearly, but quite often you can't see the instrument panel. So these graded ones, so you'll be familiar with that. So essentially that same idea happens with camera filters. And then what that allows you to do, I suppose, let's say, let's flip back into Photoshop, that photo, and open that photo. Now, I don't think it's really going to work brilliantly, but in essence, let's say I copy that, I paste that over the top of this one. So what we've got is we've got two layers. We've got the dark one on top of the light one. Now, if I create a mask there, and then I'm going to do a gradient map which is going to neutralize the bottom half of it. So you can see that what it does is it's like we've only got the dark part on the top, we don't have it on the bottom. Now if we had that upside down, we'd have the worst of all worlds. This is very rough. This is, I mean, the colours are all going askew. This isn't really, but what I'm trying to do here is just give you that idea that a neutral density filter will give you a darker top part and a lighter and just a clear bottom part. So you can expose the foreground as you normally would, knowing that the upper half of the photo is going to be much darker. But if that upper half is containing a bright sky and a bright sun, then it starts to even itself out. I'm afraid I can't show you any photos like this. I don't tend to use them. I know of them. When you're doing portrait photography, it doesn't tend to come into it. But for landscape photographers, this idea of using filters and graded filters is used an awful lot to be able to allow you to get the lovely detail in the sun. I mean, if I go, because there was another photo of yours, where have I put it? Okay, I'll just open it again. Yeah, this one. I mean, if we go back to this one, VG, there are, okay, so you've exposed for the sun. You've lost down here. There's only a hint of the beautiful reflections. I think part of that might be to do with the way the sun's going, but in amongst here, I mean, look at these beautiful edge lines of the clouds. I love them. And then when I zoom in, I suddenly notice these little birds as well, beautifully silhouetted. So there's a lot to be said for being able for you know, I mean, what would be nicer? I mean, well, you can play around forever if you get birds close in the foreground running across the front. Yeah, it's these lines, they just really grab me. Of course, at this point, this zoomed in, that sun is just too big. It's just drawing all the attention. And again, kind of similar with what I was saying to... I think this one would almost work if you'd sort of done it sideways. I mean, again, just to... Well, there's a number of different ways. I mean, pull up here. If this was sort of extended out a bit, something like that. Yeah, I think, you know, that maybe gives it slightly more room to breathe. I think you could maybe come back a little bit further. I think you probably must have been zoomed in quite a lot to have the sun taking up that much. I think you could maybe have come back out a bit with that. Anyway, that's kind of going off the point a little bit. The main thing was this notion of the filter. So gradiated filters are the way to go with that. Okay, hope that helps then, VG. I'm just going to flip back to Facebook, seeing what else I've got. I should have cropped in earlier. Popped in earlier just to see what. So Stacey, back to Stacey. I would have been in the street. Absolutely did look at the pole. The building is flat on the other side with trash. Okay. So that's referring back to that the building on German Street, and yes, she's anchored it to the pole, and that bit of building to the left wasn't worth including. Also, I agree about pulling back. It helps. Thanks. Okay, I'm glad that was useful, Stacey. Thank you for. I'm glad you're watching, and thank you for taking the time to comment. Paul says, love the really dark sunsets, crop it in portrait mode. Your dark sunset is the one I'm referring to. And okay, so he's talking about my one rather than, so let's flip back for a moment. So I'm talking about this one. Okay, so that's what Paul's saying here, is to just make the most of this, where you crop in portrait mode, something like this. maybe probably what I'm doing here is playing full on rule of thirds, so that we've got that running down the edge there. So yeah, I mean, that kind of makes something. I still think it's just a wee bit too dark. But yes, you can always go in and you can always play. Okay, thanks for that, Paul. What else we got? VG, this is incredible. Thanks, Kim. Oh, okay, thanks. And you didn't notice the bird. And it's amazing how much sometimes, you've taken the photo, but it's only when you really zoom in you suddenly find all sorts of extra bits. I've taken quite a few flower photos, not dissimilar to Stacey's earlier, where I thought it was just a nice picture of a flower, and then as I've kind of zoomed in, I've suddenly found some little insect sitting in there which kind of spoils it. Or very occasionally you can get a nice little insect which enhances the picture, and sometimes you just get one where it was at the wrong angle and essentially you're looking up a fly's backside and it's not pretty. Right, okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to Alison. So Alison has sent me a couple of photos, and she says, right, okay, let's pull up Alison's photo. Okay, well, let's flip back to Photoshop. Let's bring you guys back over here. I'll just clear these out of the way. And so Alison's first one, this is her edited version, and this is her unedited version. And she says, I'd be interested in your comments on this image. I've included the original and the one I edited. My main problem was straightening it and losing the top of the building. So you can see the top of the building there, and she's straightened it, and she was a bit worried about trying to lose the top, losing it there. Also, the original was underexposed. I think I've ended up overcompensating. It's called Love Me, Love You. So what she's spotted here is the fact that you've got this couple over on the left, and we've got the bloke doing the selfie with the selfie stick in the middle, and another bloke over on the right doing the selfie, coffee in hand as well by the look of it. And if we go back to here, this is the original one, and so this is great. I mean, it's that observational thing. So she's out, she's in Hong Kong, she's obviously a classic viewpoint, and you want to take a view of the Hong Kong skyline, and all these huge buildings, and then there's these other people either getting in the way of what you're trying to do, or you go, hey, actually, let's take a photo of them taking photos of it. That's the story. So she's managed to fire off a quick shot. The problem with these kind of shots is always the fact that when you're photographing other people, unless you kind of got a part of your brain that is just not embarrassed by these things, and you can kind of go, I don't care. And a lot of street photographers kind of have to have that kind of attitude. For most of the rest of us who aren't natural street photographers, we kind of feel intensely self-conscious about photographing anybody else who hasn't, especially who haven't asked us to photograph them. And so we kind of quickly fire off a couple of snaps, and then when we get back, we go, oh, I didn't straighten the horizon. Oh, I underexposed. Oh, yeah. It's afterwards you think of all the things you should have had. I can't remember who said it, but probably countless photographers in the past have often said it's only when they were in the dark room did they discover the photo they should have taken. Likewise, it's only when you sit down and you're going through your folder of images you tend to realise that that's what I should have done. I've even heard filmmakers say it's only when they're in the editing suite do they realise the film they should have made. So it's part of the human condition. So the question is with this one is what else could you have done with it? So this is what you did do with it, and this is great. You've straightened up the horizon, you've cropped in. Clearly the girl on the left here wasn't part of the story you were going for. Your story is called Love Me, Love You. So it's really about this couple and this person here. I would say I'm not totally sure how much the guy on the right is really needed, but so if we go back here, And let's just do the straightforward. If we straighten it, as we kind of, actually, if I take off content aware a moment, and you'll see the problem if you straighten it and try and keep the natural pixels. So we straighten it, and sort of, I'm just sort of leveling it up roughly so that that's staying. But well, the problem is if I keep that building vertical, then the horizontal horizon isn't quite there. If I go to the horizon, get that straight, I am definitely chipping off the top of the building. Building's also moving slightly to the left. So we can immediately see this problem. For quick, now you can muck around with cloning tools and what have you. For a quick bit, I'm going to just use content aware tool, which will do a quick fill. Now we don't need much of the bottom part of here. I'll just very quickly hit crop. Is it going to crop? Oh yes, it is. I've obviously got too many other programs. So we've got this. That one's tilted slightly. I'm going to, if I duplicate that layer, and then if I do the file, edit, free transform, I can hold the control button down, grab the top corner, and I can move that bit about. Now, all I'm really going to do is just drag it a little bit along here, just to make sure that that building is straight, because I'm going to crop out this bit afterwards. So we're back now down to, I think the real story is in these ones here. I mean, we can, if you crop her out, come back to that bit in a moment. We've got the three people, but I'm really tempted to say I kind of want to crop. But the problem we've got here is if we just kind of come to these two people, the gap between them is massive. And this is one I've talked before about this, and no doubt I will talk again about it. The problem is that gaps in photos always feel massively exaggerated. Because if we go back a step to this part, the gap between these two in the middle is approximately, I don't know, a quarter, a fifth maybe of the overall picture. But if we crop in, so the edge is here and the edge is here, this gap is now taking up a full third or more of the picture. It feels, so the gap itself just becomes very dominant. So in order to stop it feeling like such a gap, we are wanting to try and keep a bit of a distance. Now if we were cropping out this guy on the right here, we maybe take that to there, but we also need a similar kind of space over on this side. We can also bring this bottom part up here. And I now think that's giving it, I kind of do want to bring this down, except for the fact that you're right kind of about the building. What happens if we do bring it down? Maybe that works. I mean, I know there is the desire to have the top of the building in there, but I think really the story with this isn't about that building. The story here is about these couples, or this couple and this man alone here. Now, we've obviously got problems with the fact that we've got bits sticking out here. So, first of all, I'll just briefly use the fill tool and get rid of him. And now, this isn't really likely to work so well on this side, but let's just see if we can remove her. Get a little bit of C in, like that. Try and remove that leg. Yeah, I'm going to manage to fill that in. Do that. So a little bit at a time. And, okay. We filled her into the point whereby it's not so obvious. If we were doing that, we'd obviously do that a bit more properly. However, we have now isolated these couple, the couple and the guy with the selfie stick. You're right, the underexposure here becomes a bit of a problem. So what I'll do is, let's just go into camera raw for the moment. And you know what you have done is you've brought up the shadows, so we can now see a little bit more what's going on here. The overall exposure, we can see the histogram over on the right here is we can make that brighter in general, but then maybe we want to bring down the highlights a bit more, play a little bit with the clarity, and we kind of got something there. So compare that to you've gone for a very sharp detail in your one. I think this version of it, I mean, you can still play around with the black and white, and you can still play around with you know, whether you want to, for example, you know, add a vignette or stylize it a bit more, or do, you know, I mean, just pull that in a little bit more on the edges, I think, so that brings our attention more to the people who are here. But I think that gives it a little bit more room to breathe in that sense. And while I fully understand why you were trying to get the top of the building, maybe if you come back again further out, I don't know, but I've already brought it in. It's a tricky one, Alison, it's a tricky one, but I think getting rid of the other people then really brings, because this is the story. The key part of this is what's the story you're trying to get, because the story you're going for influences how you do the editing. And you've called this Love Me, Love You. There's another thing interesting about that, which is Love Me, Love You. I think this is the Love Me, this is the Love You. What if we just flip the image? How much does that change it? I think that's kind of interesting, really. Let's just do that again. So if I just undo that, and then we flip. Oddly enough, it does have a slightly different feel. And we talked a little bit before in the past about the fact that I don't know whether it's because, you know, here in the West we tend to read left to right rather than right to left. But Love Me, Love You, now we have Love Me coming first in the way that moving from left to right. So I think I don't know, it's very difficult to know at this point how much is this me reading it as opposed to how anybody would read it. Now, I suppose if you're trying to be genuine to Hong Kong skylines, then this is a big no-no, because everybody's going to look at it and go, oh, but those buildings are all in the wrong place. But we're talking about storytelling photography rather than documentary accurate capture. What's the story here? So never be afraid to flip the image and just see whether that actually changes. Now, you might still prefer the original, and that's fine. All I'm trying to do really here, Alison, is open you up to the idea of another way of doing things. So I hope that gives you a couple of ideas to play with. Now, the last picture I'm going to look at, actually I will just do a very quick check. What have we got here? Oh great, Stacey said the flare was not so good. I should have changed my lenses and used my 35mm and been better focused, do you think? Yeah, certainly to be better focused. As for which lens you're using, it kind of depends. I mean, if you're using a macro lens, these quite often tend to be, you know, more zoom rather than wide angle. Really, you're just trying it out, but I certainly get it in focus. And Alison, yes, good point. Flipping it works for me. Okay, thanks. Right, well, that's good. Okay, so we'll move on to the last one then, which is also by Alison. And this one, where are we? So again, we've got Alison's version here, and she's also sent me the original here. Hong Kong bus stop. Here's another one from the same trip. This was another of my candid shots, just a quick snap. As you can see, not posed. The girl yawning is the main problem. Again, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Well, I think I first of all, yes, it's fun, and I can see kind of why, you know, you do grab it. You've got a bunch of girls standing at a bus stop waiting. Each of them has got a different expression. Each of them is doing something of, you know, so we've got over on the far left, we've got the girl lining up her camera. Obviously, there's something happening on the other side of the road, which she's particularly interested in. Her friend's leaning over her shoulder, giving encouragement, or just also interested in how she's setting up the camera. Got this lass here, another camera in her hand, although she's not engaging with the photo, but she is still looking in the same direction. Got fourth girl here reaching into her bag. Now maybe she's about to pull out a phone or camera to take something, we're not entirely sure. This girl yawning or singing. I quite like the fact that she's sort of doing something as another aspect. She's got her phone in her hand, and then we've got a girl on the far right feels separate from the others and is then obviously posing and actually having her own photo taken. So it's quite interesting. You know, there's story stuff going on there. The lighting isn't fantastic. Obviously, you've just kind of grabbed what you could. And again, that notion of poor lighting, much like Stacey had talked before about, you know, you throw it into black and white, make it a bit more interesting. So I can kind of see that. I think my biggest problem here, and again, it's one of those things where you grab it at the time and then afterwards you kind of wish you'd done a bit more. But the angle isn't right either way. It's obviously on a slope, but then everything's tilted, but not quite with the slope. You know, either at this point you're going to go for lining up with the pavement at the bottom here, and obviously if we do that, now everybody's just standing at a funny angle, and though the pavement might be flat, it just looks totally and utterly wrong. Or what you do is you try and anchor to the verticals. Now, not necessarily this one, because that's at the edge of it, because these ones over here on the right are still leaning in. So you maybe pull up towards around the middle, around where the girl in blue with the blue top on, you want her verticals more or less there. And that kind of then gives you the vertical as we would expect to see it. And if I now do something like that, again, I'm using content fill. It's not ideal, and it's certainly not going to match up these posters correctly. But all we're talking about is to give you a sense of what would have happened had you managed to sort of straighten it up a bit. And I think we've got this slope. That's part of it. Make the most of the slope. I also do wonder, though, whether this girl on the right here is just... she feels too out. I mean, you could make a story of the fact that she's in her own world as opposed to everybody else is over there, but at that point she's sort of stuck right off over in the corner. So I'd be more tempted, I think, with the crop of this, to actually take her out and concentrate on the differences on the remaining five. So if I grab that here and maybe pull that in. Now this is a tricky one, because where are we going to crop? Are we going to cut through her feet? Are we going to leave her feet in? Or are we going to cut? You don't want to cut through the tip of the foot, because that doesn't quite look right. You either got to go for the... yeah, maybe something like that, perhaps. I think... right, we've still got a bit of her in. Let's pull that in. Now it is kind of really difficult, because we can obviously lose somebody's head quite easily at this point. But I think now we've kind of got a little bit more of a story going on. And then at this point we can let's just pop in the camera roll. And then if you want, you can go to the point of, again, well, I suppose if you went, turn it black and white, bring a little bit more of the shadows up, bring the exposure up a bit, oh no, not that much, take the highlights down a touch. Now that's neutralised it a bit, but then if you play with the clarity, you can maybe get something like that. Not sure whether that's actually making the background a bit too busy. Yeah, probably is. So another option would be to sort of darken the background a little bit more, so that these girls are standing out a little bit more from it. I was wondering what happens if you do the channels with that. Red, green, blue. That kind of plays around with it a little bit as well. If you remember the black and white conversions that I did, if you can go to channels and then play with the red, green and blue, they all change slightly which colours are being lighter and which ones are being darker. But yeah, there's a number of different ways you can convert to black and white. Again, we'll just do the gradient map and then maybe play with the curves, give it that little S where you kind of brighten it there and then you darken it there a bit. So plenty to play with, but I think really it's with the crop here, it's getting them straight rather than all slightly tilted, I think is a better thing. And if we go back to the original photo, your main problem here is everybody's tilted, the road's tilted, but they're not all, you know, you kind of want them upright. But again, I fully understand, Alison, it's that problem of you grab the photo, and this is why it's remembering, the thing is when we see street photography, and there's some amazing street photography out there, and you just think, wow, how did these people manage to get those shots? And the fact is, they took thousands. Street photography is got one of the smallest hit rates of almost any kind of photography. There are so many near misses, and a lot of that comes from so often the moment because things are moving all the time, you notice something which grabs you, you go, what? And by the time you've got your camera to your eye, it's gone. And even sometimes if you've got the camera there, by the time you've taken the time to react and then line it up and go click, it's gone. So it's I think, I'm not a street photographer. I have huge respect for those who can do it, but it's a very, very different thing to portrait and stage narrative photography. But I do know that those who do it have a very small hit rate, but the fact is, and this is true for all photography, and if you're learning photography and you ever feel a bit low that everybody else seems to create great photos, and a lot of them seem to boast about the fact that, they hardly, hey, I just turned up, I took the photo, and there you go. Most of that is complete nonsense. The reality is that you are just seeing the best photos, and they have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of images, if not thousands of folders full of images of the ones that got away, the ones that didn't quite work. We only ever put up our best stuff. You don't put up your mediocre stuff. You don't put up the stuff that didn't work because, well, why? Who's interested in it? Now you learn from the stuff that doesn't work, but you don't get the praise from the stuff that doesn't work. So you don't put the stuff up that doesn't work because that never gives you the praise. If you want the praise, you only put up the ones that work, but you have to take a lot of them to find the ones that have worked. Okay, I think that pretty much draws us towards the end now. Okay, last point Alison's just said, thanks Kim, I love that shoe, so would never have thought of cropping it like that. Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. There you go. I mean, if you talk about story, okay, let me just pull this back a minute. I've got to go and take another look at those shoes. Right. Okay, you see, this is me. This is me being a bloke. This is me being a bloke with absolutely no fashion sense whatsoever. The shoes wouldn't have occurred to me as being something to look at. It is to you, and that's brilliant. That's what I love about photography, is about your eye, what's capturing your eye. And suddenly we've got an entirely different shoot photograph. Let's go back, let's just maybe straighten that up again. And what if you just did legs only? That's not perfect photo by any chance, or perfect crop or anything. But the point is that you do something like that, and you now have a different story. That the feet are telling a different story. A story of, a little bit apart, firmly grounded, feet closer together, slightly more nervous, casual stance on one foot, other one crossed over, wide stance, feet properly kind of pull apart. She's confident, rooted, knows what she's doing. She's got one foot in front of the other, almost like she's posing, for somebody on the other side, but maybe she has just sort of stopped to yawn. So yeah, whole psychology in shoes and leg work. Different story again. Didn't occur to me in the slightest until I saw your comment. So thank you, Alison. That's brilliant. That just yeah, that's really cool. So this brings us to the end. If you've enjoyed this, do consider the idea of supporting with buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. If you've just come in at the end and would like to watch the rest of it, then, well, if you're still on Facebook, when I finish this, there'll just be a little moment where it renders itself, and then it's available to kind of go back and look. But primarily it's being, by tomorrow afternoon, I will have this up on YouTube. And next week I'm not 100%. I thought I knew what I was going to do for next week, but I've then had another idea which is playing in my mind, and I need to investigate it a little bit more before I do. So all I was saying, turn up next Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. UK time here on Facebook Live. And we'll again look at photos, and if you're interested, if you get your photos in, don't be shy, join the Facebook group, stick your images in, and we can play with them and hopefully give you other ideas of ways you could have edited it or taken the photo. And again, if there's particular aspects that you're uncertain about, this is the place where, everything you wanted to ask about photography but we're too afraid to ask, something like that. It's that's what I'm here for, help you with your photography. So let me know. So thank you very much for sticking with me through all this lot, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye bye.